The studio lights burned hotter than usual that night, casting a glossy sheen over the familiar stage where laughter was supposed to come easily. Ben Stiller walked out to applause that felt polite rather than electric, the kind that skimmed the surface without fully landing. He smiled, waved, did all the things he'd done 1,000 times before, but something in his eyes suggested he was already bracing himself. Jimmy Fallon met him halfway, arms open, energy high, doing his best to pull the room into his usual rhythm. They sat, the band played them in. The cameras rolled. At first, everything followed the expected script. Jimmy joked about Ben's long career, his iconic roles, the way his comedies had defined entire generations. Ben laughed, nodded, added a few dry remarks of his own. The audience chuckled, the kind of safe laughter that came from familiarity. But beneath the surface, there was a tension that hadn't been there before, something subtle but unmistakable, like a string pulled too tight. Jimmy shifted gears, glancing at his cue cards. "So, Ben," he said lightly, "you've been pretty quiet lately. No big press tours, not many interviews. Are you just over Hollywood, or is Hollywood over you?" The question landed heavier than Jimmy seemed to expect. A few audience members laughed, assuming it was a joke. Ben's smile stiffened, just for a second, but the cameras caught it. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I wouldn't put it that way," Ben replied, his voice calm but edged. "I've been working, just not shouting about it." Jimmy raised his eyebrows, trying to keep things playful. Right, but you know how it is. If you're not constantly out there, people start wondering if you've lost your edge." The word edge hung in the air. Ben tilted his head, studying Jimmy as if deciding how seriously to take him. The band went quiet. The laughter faded into an uneasy silence. "Do people wonder that?" Ben asked, "or are you wondering that?" A ripple moved through the audience. Jimmy laughed quickly, a little too quickly. "Hey, I'm just saying what's out there." Ben leaned forward now, elbows on his knees. "That's interesting," he said. "Because what's out there usually comes from places like this." Jimmy's smile faltered. He glanced toward the band, then back at Ben. "Come on, man, you know this is just fun. Is it?" Ben shot back. "Because it feels less like fun and more like a cheap shot." A few gasps echoed from the crowd. The energy in the room shifted, the way it does when everyone realizes something real is happening, something unscripted. Jimmy straightened in his chair, his tone tightening. "Ben, nobody's taking shots. We're talking about relevance. It's part of the business." Ben laughed once, sharply. "Relevance," he repeated. "Funny word. It usually gets thrown at people who aren't willing to play along." Jimmy frowned. "Play along with what?" "With the idea that you have to constantly reinvent yourself just to be accepted," Ben said. "Or worse, dumb yourself down." The audience murmured. Jimmy opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly weighing his response. When he spoke, his voice was more defensive. "So now you're saying comedy's dumb?" "No," Ben replied, shaking his head. "I'm saying the way we talk about it has become shallow. Everything's about clicks, clips, moments that go viral. Not the work." Jimmy leaned forward too, mirroring Ben's posture. "This is a comedy show, Ben. We make moments. That's literally the job. And sometimes," Ben said quietly, "those moments come at someone else's expense." The silence that followed was heavy enough to feel physical. The band members exchanged glances. A producer off camera shifted in his seat. This was no longer a playful debate, it was personal. Jimmy tried to steer things back. "Okay, let's reset. You've got this new project." "I don't want to reset," Ben interrupted, his voice firm but controlled. "I want to finish the thought." Jimmy blinked, clearly not expecting that. "We've got time constraints." "Then maybe," Ben said, "you shouldn't have opened the door." A low murmur rolled through the audience. Some leaned forward, captivated. Others looked uncomfortable, unsure whether to clap or stay silent. Jimmy's jaw tightened. "Look," he said, dropping the playful tone entirely, "I respect you. But you're coming on my show and acting like this is some kind of ambush." Ben shook his head slowly. "No, I'm reacting to being told, on national television, that my career's fading." "I didn't say that," Jimmy shot back. "You implied it," Ben replied. "And implications matter." For a brief moment, it felt like time slowed. The studio lights hummed. The cameras zoomed in, hungry for every micro-expression. Jimmy exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Ben," he said, trying one last time to smooth things over, "this isn't the hill to die on." Ben stood. The movement was sudden enough to draw a collective gasp. He adjusted his jacket, looking down at Jimmy with an expression that was calm, but resolute. "No," Ben said evenly. "It's just the hill I'm done pretending doesn't exist." Jimmy half rose from his chair. "Wait, come on." But Ben was already turning away, walking toward the edge of the stage as producers scrambled just out of frame. The audience didn't know how to react. A few clapped hesitantly, others sat frozen, eyes wide. As Ben reached the curtain, he paused and looked back once more. "Comedy deserves better than this," he said, not angrily, but with quiet disappointment. Then he disappeared backstage, leaving Jimmy Fallon standing alone under the lights, the laughter track silent, the moment hanging unresolved as the show rushed toward an abrupt commercial break. The commercial break ended faster than anyone backstage wanted. Jimmy Fallon stood where Ben had left him, the applause sign dark, the audience still buzzing with confused whispers. When the red light on the camera blinked back on, Jimmy forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He thanked the crowd, cracked a rushed joke that fell flat, and tossed to a musical segment that felt suddenly out of place. The band played, but the rhythm was stiff, the energy fractured. Everyone could feel it. Something had gone wrong, and it hadn't stayed backstage where these things were supposed to live. Behind the curtain, the atmosphere was far more chaotic. Ben Stiller moved down the narrow hallway with long, controlled strides, his face set in a calm that masked the storm underneath. A producer hurried after him, whispering his name, asking him to slow down, to talk, to reconsider. Ben stopped once, turned, and listened without interrupting. When the producer finished, Ben nodded politely. "I said what I needed to say," he replied. "There's nothing left to perform." Another producer appeared, this one less diplomatic, voice tight with frustration. He told Ben the segment had gone off the rails, that the network wasn't happy, that this wasn't how things were done. Ben didn't argue. He simply shrugged, thanked them for having him, and asked where the exit was. The words, "We're going to have to ask you to leave the studio," followed him down the hall, formal and final. It wasn't dramatic, it was procedural, and somehow, that made it sting more. Back on stage, Jimmy wrapped the show as best he could. He thanked the band again, waved to the crowd, and disappeared behind the desk the second the cameras cut. The smile dropped instantly. He stood there for a moment, staring at the empty chair where Ben had been sitting. As if replaying every word, every inflection, searching for the exact point where control had slipped through his fingers. In his dressing room, Jimmy paced. Producers filled the space, talking over one another, damage control, social media, network calls already coming in. Clips were spreading fast. Someone mentioned that Ben Stiller kicked off Fallon was already trending. Jimmy winced. That wasn't how he saw it. In his mind, he'd tried to keep things light, to do his job. But the footage didn't care about intention. It only showed what happened. Meanwhile, Ben stepped out into the cool night air, the studio lights fading behind him. The city hummed, indifferent to the small earthquake that had just rippled through late-night television. His phone buzzed almost immediately. Messages from friends, colleagues, agents. Some supportive, some cautious, some simply asking, "What happened?" Ben didn't answer right away. He stood on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, letting the moment settle. He felt relief, surprisingly strong. He hadn't planned to walk off. He hadn't planned to push back that hard. But once the words started coming, he hadn't been able to stop them. And he didn't regret that. By morning, the story had taken on a life of its own. Headlines screamed about a heated clash, about Ben being kicked off the show after losing his temper. Commentators dissected his tone, Jimmy's questions, the audience's reaction. Some painted Ben as thin-skinned, unable to take a joke. Others praised him for calling out what they saw as the hollow machinery of late-night television. The clip racked up millions of views, each replay sharpening the narrative a little more. Jimmy addressed it the next night, briefly. He opened the show with a measured statement about live television, about conversations sometimes going in unexpected directions. He said he respected Ben, that things had gotten intense, and that he wished him well. It was polished, careful, designed to close the chapter. But the chapter refused to close. Ben, for his part, stayed quiet for days. When he finally spoke, it wasn't on another couch, under another set of lights. It was through a short, thoughtful post that avoided blame and avoided apology. He wrote about creative exhaustion, about the pressure to be endlessly on, endlessly marketable. He wrote about comedy as craft, not content. The response was overwhelming. Industry insiders weighed in. Some late-night hosts defended Jimmy, arguing that the format thrived on provocation and play. Others admitted, quietly, that Ben had touched a nerve. Younger comedians shared stories about feeling chewed up by the system, reduced to soundbites. Older ones talked about how things had changed, how the line between humor and humiliation had blurred. Weeks later, Jimmy and Ben had not spoken publicly to each other. There were rumors of a private phone call that never happened, of apologies drafted and deleted. The truth was simpler. Both men were busy, both bruised in different ways, both unsure how, or if, to step back into that moment without reopening it. For Jimmy, the show went on. It always did. The desk was the same, the jokes were the same, the laughter returned. But there was a subtle shift, a new caution in how he framed questions, how far he pushed. Viewers noticed. Some praised the change, others missed the edge. For Ben, the incident became a strange footnote in a long career, one he didn't disown and didn't dwell on. In interviews months later, he spoke more openly about choosing projects carefully, about stepping back from the noise. When asked about that night, he smiled gently and said, "Live TV is honest. Sometimes more honest than we expect." The chair on Jimmy Fallon's stage had been filled hundreds of times. Since then, by actors, musicians, comedians eager to tell their stories. But for those who had been there that night, and for the millions who watched it unfold on screens small and large, the memory lingered, a reminder that even in a room built for laughter, truth can still walk out early, leaving silence in its wake.